Good morning and welcome to LLT 121, Classical Mythology. In our last class, we were examining the concept of the Ages of Humankind. Hesiod was the first to write it down circa 750 BC. Remember that Hesiod also had other theories about the creation of humankind. Who can forget that Pandora, the first woman, was created as a punishment for mankind. And now Hesiod springs version number 2 on us, the so-called Ages of Humankind. To sum up briefly with the help of a chart that I have just designed, Hesiod posits a sequence of 5 eras, not each of them, but based on a series of metals. The first age is the Golden Age. Out of 10, I would give it a 9.5. They weren't quite gods. They might be giants, but I'm not sure whether they really deserve a 10. Zeus destroyed the golden race of humans because he had just come to power and they were not his people. The Silver Age, I arbitrarily assign an 8 to. We see the same downward trend that people have been getting up on soapboxes and proclaiming for centuries. The world is going down the tubes and your generation is to blame. The Bronze Age is another step down. Although the humans had come up with an advance in the form of bronze implements, bronze plowshares, bronze swords, they used these implements for the wrong things. They used them for war. Good God. What is it good for? It was good for getting them killed. This generation succeeded in wiping itself off the face of the earth, according to Hesiod. Then we've got heroes. This is the rather embarrassing up-blip with which we ended our last class. When I think of Hesiod, the Greek poet Hesiod, I think of a fellow standing up on a soapbox complaining about everything and saying that the main problem is that you people do not worship and respect Zeus sufficiently. And certainly the Iron Age, in which Hesiod believes himself to live, is really pretty pitiful. 0 out of 0. How to explain the heroes? Well, these are, as I think one of you, was it you, Farrellyn, pointed out, these are the heroes of ancient Greek mythology, heroes such as Heracles, heroes such as Achilles, such as Agamemnon and Ulysses. They did represent an uplift, but don't worry, says Hesiod, now that we're in the Iron Age, we're hitting the skids and moving downward. 750 years later, the Roman poet Ovid takes the same basic schema and gives us his own take on the quote-unquote ages of humankind. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The Weltanschauung of a civilization is in large part determined by its own situation in the world at the time. Life was nasty, brutish, and short in 750 BC ancient Greece. It had become much kinder, much gentler. The life expectancy had gone up. Creature comforts had multiplied by 1 AD. And this viewpoint is going to be reflected in Ovid's poetry. I'll tell you right off the bat, it is going to be more optimistic than is Hesiod's version of the same myth. Sure, Ovid is taking the story of the ages of humankind. We can bust Ovid for plagiarism. However, I think that Ovid has done something novel and exciting with the ages of humankind. Ovid has the same ages to start out with: gold, silver, bronze. He skips the Age of Heroes. And if anybody can give me a good reason why Ovid skips the Age of Heroes, he or she can put their head down on the desk and sleep and even snore for the rest of the class period. Your name is?
Mitch?
Yeah.
I guess maybe because he felt that, life was so good then that they really didn't have a need for heroes.
That's pretty good, but it's not right. Mark?
Ovid wasn't Greek.
Thank you. Put your head down, have a graham cracker, go to sleep. He's a Greek, whereas Ovid is a Roman. What does he care about Greek heroes? So he just skips the Age of Heroes and goes to the Iron Age. Right at the end of Hesiod's account of the Ages of Humankind, he makes the statement that Zeus will destroy this Iron Age too when it comes to pass that father gets angry at son, and so on and so forth. In the Iron Age, in Ovid's account of the Iron Age, Zeus, actually to give him his Roman name, Jupiter, does destroy the whole world by the ever popular motif of flood. I teach comparative mythology at this university also, and by this point in the semester, we usually have encountered 3 or 4 flood myths. I've gone for 3 weeks without a flood myth, and I'm really having a tough time with it. So we'll have a flood myth. But before we discuss the flood myth, as reported to us by Ovid, I want to give you a little note about names of gods and goddesses. The Greek god Zeus, that's spelled Z-E-U-S, that's the only way it's spelled, and anybody who spells it any other way will fry. Okay, has the Roman equivalent god of Jupiter. Zeus's wife's name is Hera in Greek, and it's Juno in Latin. One of the things I'm going to require you to know for your test, well, actually this is good for the entire semester, is that the major Greek gods also have Roman names. Okay? The same studly-looking, roving-eyed god, author of the world's worst pickup line with the slightly receding hairline and stuff, the leader of the universe was known to the ancient Greeks as Zeus and to the Romans as Jupiter. He was more or less the same god, but not quite. Very briefly, what happened? Why did the Romans wind up with Greek gods? Because of a process called syncretism. This is the sort of buzzword you are bound to see on an exam sooner or later. Syncretism is just another name for the merging, if you will, of gods or goddesses. To give you a hypothetical example, the Greeks have a thunder god named Zeus, a lightning god named Zeus who rules the universe. The Greeks, who were culturally ahead of the Romans, started building colonies in Italy, where they met the Romans. And the Romans noticed, wow, these ancient Greeks have a lightning god named Zeus who is married to the chief goddess Hera, and he messes around on her constantly, and she's always picking on his old girlfriends and stuff. That's like our god Jupiter. That must be our god Jupiter. They just happen to know more about Zeus than we know about Jupiter. They're more advanced than we are. Okay, I tell you what, their god Zeus is the same as our god Jupiter. Their goddess Hera is the same as our goddess Juno. Their goddess Athena is the same as our goddess Minerva, and so on. In your study guide, there's a whole big list the names of Greek gods and goddesses and their Roman equivalents. Memorize it. Do yourself a favor. Memorize it. It's not all that hard. Memorize it. That's the subliminal approach to teaching. Memorize it. Because it's really not worth my class time to tell you about it much more. But syncretism is a process by which one culture takes on another culture's gods, sometimes complete with their names, sometimes under different names. Any merging of gods, I guess, could be called syncretism.
This only applies to religious things.
No, it can apply to any number, cultural phenomena, actually, Mark. Okay, that said, according to Ovid, Jupiter, whose name in Greek is what? Your name is? Scott? Okay, and his son, Mercury, whose ancient Greek name is what? Hermes, decide to go out and check out the way these humans are behaving. They heard reports that the humans are acting up again, and they're going to go check them out. Jupiter and Mercury, that is to say, Zeus and Hermes, disguise themselves as old beggars and a younger beggar, an older beggar and a younger beggar, and they go around seeing who's nice to them and who's mean to them. They wind up at the house of a king by the name of Lycaon, whose name I will now write on the board. Lycaon. And Lycaon, who thinks that this might be Jupiter in disguise, decides he'll find out one way or another. He'll try to kill him. Try to kill Jupiter in his sleep. The technical term for this is hubris, believing that you are greater to or greater than or equal to a god. Another good description of this is bad career move. Because Jupiter and Mercury get very, very angry. They change Lycaon into a wolf. And Jupiter decides that he would like to destroy the universe. Now, in the year of our Lord 750 BC, a time at which society in general was suffering from a nastier, harsher Weltanschauung, Zeus destroys the human race because he wants to. If he's having a bad hair day, he destroys the human race and feels better because he is an all-powerful, authoritarian chief god. The Romans, on the other hand, who lived in the time period, well, the Roman civilization is still with us today, but we're talking about the time of Christ, had a fully developed set of political institutions, like a Senate, other elective bodies. They had elected officials that served for 1 year. They had elections every year. Politics in ancient Rome was a blood sport. And so, in Ovid's version of this fine story, Jupiter goes to the assembly of gods and goddesses and asks for permission to destroy the universe again. And there is some discussion. Oh, didn't you do that last time? We're getting tired. The humans are so funny with their little acts or little wars, and their sacrifices are neat, and besides, who are we going to chase around if you kill all the mortal women? But finally they agree with him because he is, after all, Jupiter, darn it. He says that he would like to use thunder and lightning to destroy the world. That, however, is voted down. The other gods and goddesses point out, what if you burn the whole universe down instead of just the humans? Well, duh, okay. How about a flood? How about a nice flood? Since they're all agreed on destroying the world by flood, they tell Jupiter that he can go ahead and destroy the world by flood, destroy the humans by means of a flood. But God bless you, he has to promise, and he does promise, to create a wondrous new race of earth. This becomes important. The flood takes place. Neptune, god of the ocean, whose name in ancient Greek is Poseidon, sends various winds and waves and whatnot, and pretty soon we have cows floating and getting tangled in trees, and dolphins swimming through the fourth stories of various buildings, and your usual production values that go along with your typical ancient flood story. In this account of the flood story, exactly 2 human beings are saved. Does this sound familiar? They are saved because they are good people. Their names are as follows. A man named Deucalion, who is said to be the son of Prometheus, and a woman by the name of Pyrrha, who is said to be the daughter of Epimetheus. I will not entertain picky detail questions at this time. You're Josh, right? Jeremy, god of picky details. Deucalion and Pyrrha are very old. They are so old that reproduction by the usual way is out of the question. What happens is they're riding the storm out, the waters recede, they find themselves alone on the ground, on dry land, and faced with the task of repopulating the universe, except for they're too old. And they start weeping and wailing. Finally, they go to the oracle of Mother Gaia, who just happens to be in the vicinity. And she says to them oracularly, "Throw your mother's bones over your shoulders." Now, Pyrrha, because she is female in a myth passed on by a patriarchal society, takes the story literally. "You mean to dig up Mother and throw her bones over my shoulders? Oh, how grody! That's sacrilege!" But Deucalion, because he is a male character in a myth passed on by a patriarchal society, gets to have the light, well, maybe it's just a candle over his head. Who is the mother of us all? Of course, the great goddess Gaia. So what Deucalion and Pyrrha do is they pick up rocks and toss them over their shoulder. The rocks and clods of dirt, which Deucalion throws over his shoulder, become men. The clods of dirt and rocks, which Pyrrha throws over her shoulder, become women. And the population of humankind springs up again. How neat! How nifty! A wondrous race of earth, which Jupiter promised the assembly of gods and goddesses he would create. Molly, your question. Any questions or complaints? Crystal.
Okay, so Hesiod and Ovid, were they were they supposedly living in this time and all this stuff?
Good question. Hesiod believed, remember that Hesiod ends his account with the Iron Age. Okay? And he did believe that he's living in the Iron Age. He says he wished that he'd been born before or after because he hates it so much. And Ovid really does believe that he is born in the Earth Age.
So, didn't they realize, like, when this flood, it really didn't happen, that there wasn't any gods and goddesses?
Clear out. I think this woman's going to fry. A great number of civilizations have flood myths. And, civilizations, for one thing, tend to spring up in river valleys. Okay? And the Romans were no different. The Romans were in the Tiber River Valley. And just about every civilization that sprang up along a river has a doozy of a flood story packed away in their mind. I would suspect that this is just the old generic flood story, okay, tacked onto some doozy of a flood back in Roman history that's only remembered, by word of mouth. Is that answering your question, kind of? Okay, if it's not, ask me again. I'll make up a different answer. Okay, very excellent. Well, I talked that one to death. Other questions, perhaps one I can answer. Okay, we charge on. If we were to graph Ovid's Ages of Humankind, it's downhill, 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 and then up. The age of Earth, the wondrous age of Earth, which Jupiter promised to create if the other gods and goddesses would let him zap the Iron Age. And it happened. Question?
In comparison to Hesiod, did Ovid, did the scholars feel that Ovid believed all the tales?
No, as a general rule, people think that Ovid was pretty skeptical. Okay.
Writing for entertainment.
Well, Ovid, funny you should ask that. Ovid writes for a number of purposes. His Metamorphoses, a book about how people change into different stuff, basically that's what it's about, is one of our very best sources for mythology. Ovid wants to entertain us, make us think, make us laugh, make us cry, make us throw up. He wants to make us do a number of things. And I think, too, that there is a good deal of moral content to be found in Ovid, and a lot of immoral content, too. If I could be shipwrecked on an island with one famous writer from ancient society, I would pick Ovid hands down. No sweat. The guy is just that great. Good question, well answered. Other questions, Farrellyn?
So that's why Ovid turned Lycon into a wolf? That wasn't to explain anything? Or?
Well, actually, the Greek word for wolf is lycos. So he became the first wolf.
Was he a wolf or was he more like a werewolf?
A werewolf is a human being who turns into a wolf.
I thought maybe it was just wolf, explaining how wolves were around.
No, I think it could be an explanation of a werewolf, because they had werewolves back in they had werewolf stories back in ancient Rome. Not to offend any of you who still believe in werewolves. Okay, question up to this point. Okay, I've mentioned the concept of syncretism, in which Greek gods are given Roman names. That's pretty boring. Supposedly, the ancient Greek gods lived on Mount Olympus, which was a very high mountain located in ancient Greece. It's still there in modern Greece to this day. Somebody must have looked up and said, "It's so high, the gods must live on it." Fine, that's where we'll park them, Mark. I don't care to discuss that because it doesn't interest me. I told you that the name of this chapter really ought to be All That Zeus, and it's time for Zeus to, as they say, get busy. Zeus's official wife is his sister Hera. Zeus and Hera have 4 children, or 3.5 children, depending on how you care to interpret it. One son of theirs is Ares, the god of war. Good God. Another daughter of theirs is Hebe, goddess of youthful beauty. Another daughter is Eileithyia. Don't worry, I very seldom put that on a quiz. Goddess of childbirth. There are a lot of goddesses of childbirth in ancient Greek and ancient Roman myth. I would suggest this is because the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans had patriarchal societies, which means the deities in charge of important stuff like roads or travel and whatnot, God bless you, are likely to be male. Whereas women get to be goddesses, goddesses get to be in charge of cooking and childbirth. Childbirth is the one thing in most ancient societies that women alone are allowed to do. The Hittites thought differently, perhaps. One child that Hera supposedly had all by herself is Hephaestus, the god of metal shop, the so-called crippled, handicapped god who was so ugly when he was born that Zeus threw him off of Mount Olympus. According to Hesiod, Hera gave birth to Hephaestus all by herself. But keep in mind that she is Gaia's granddaughter. And Gaia's granddaughter, she's a she's the mother of all earth goddesses. Why not? That's all I have to say. Why not? One day, as Hephaestus gets married to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love, marrying the smoke-blackened, club-footed god of metal shop. Zeus did this to Aphrodite, it is said, to fix her. Because she was always making people fall in love and behave like absolute idiots. Did people behave like absolute idiots when they are in love? Yes, that's how you know they are really in love. When they do really stupid things that embarrass them to death when they hear about it afterwards. Zeus says, I'll fix you, I'll marry you to the Danny DeVito of the gods, the ugly god. But the thing is, Hephaestus is such a nice god. Everybody likes him. He's just not easy on the eyes. And so one day, while Hephaestus is off on a business trip, Aphrodite is looking for a little loving on the side. And that's okay because she's the goddess of beauty and desirability and scoring copiously. And she decides to go over to the house of Ares, the god of war, who is a very studly god. Of course, he's a total and consummate dork. One time he got wounded in the Trojan War and he came up to Mount Olympus and started whining. They got hurt, shot me. And Zeus put him in a barrel and nailed it shut until he stopped whining. Good God, what is it good for? And meanwhile, Ares and Aphrodite, are having a little hanky-panky in the El Saco when Helios, the sun god, cruising up in his chariot 24 hours a day, well, no, he's the sun god, but he's up there, right? He sees a lot. And he looks down and he sees Ares and Aphrodite in flagrante delicto. In flagrante, which is Latin for doing the wild thing. Okay, but if you say in flagrante delicto, it just sounds much more dignified. Well, maybe somebody in this room has been in this situation. I mean, how anthropomorphic can these deities get? Where one person is messing around on their main squeeze and you know about it, but do you tell them? Do you not tell them? Well, here's Helios, he's a god, and he's stuck trying to figure out, do I narc on Aphrodite? Or do I, help Hephaestus out? Well, finally he says, he calls a meeting with Hephaestus and says, Hephaestus, Aphrodite's been messing around on you with Ares. Hephaestus is not happy to hear this. In his function as the god of metal shop, Hephaestus makes some unbreakable chains of such thin metal that they can't be seen. He is, after all, the god of metal shop, right, Jeremy? And you are still Jeremy.
Correct.
Good. And the next time that, Aphrodite comes over to Ares' house for a little lovin', next time they are in flagrante delicto, Hephaestus pops out of the woodwork, throws the chain over them, which is invisible, and calls all the gods to look at it. And all the gods are standing around and looking at this sight. But not the ancient Greek goddesses. Your name is Heather, right? Why do you think this is? That all the gods are standing around looking, but not the goddesses. Make something up. Because this is a patriarchal society in which men have manly sexual urges, which it is all right to act upon, but women are supposed to stay home and behave themselves. The good old double standard. So all the gods are standing there looking at Ares, caught in flagrante delicto with Aphrodite. And finally, I think it's Poseidon, the sea god, otherwise known to the Romans as Neptune, who says, I tell you what, let him out, and I will make sure, Hephaestus, that he makes it up to you, or I'll kill him. So they let him go. But here's an example of an ancient Greek joke. This ancient Greek joke is about 3,200 years old. Apollo and Hermes are standing there looking at Ares and Aphrodite caught in flagrante delicto. And Apollo says, man, how would you like to be caught in the buff with Aphrodite like that? And Hermes says, wow, that would rule. I'd love it. So much for an ancient Greek 3,200-year-old joke. Other gods and goddesses I should mention, well, let's put it this way. A joke which I tell people constantly in class, it's really not a joke, is the number one cause of teenage pregnancy in ancient Greece was Zeus. I mean, goddesses, women, doesn't matter, Zeus does it. And we can explain this by Zeus's own bad behavior as a philandering husband, not big on commitment. Yes, I know women, what men are, and stuff like that. But it's also necessary for Zeus to have a lot of little godlings and kings and queens. Because let's face it, let's say that I am the king of this classroom, and you adore me accordingly, as you no doubt do. You don't want to say I am the son of, a couple from Wisconsin named Ray and Laura, which I actually am. Oh, that's Ray and Laurie's kid. No, he was the offspring of Zeus and a promising young sea nymph. John Q. Hammonds is another example of a person who's got his name on all the monuments in town and stuff like that. You wouldn't want it to be said of him that his parents were a regular guy and a regular woman. No, we make up some story. And who better to pick out for the ancestor of your god or your hero than the father of gods and men, Zeus. Zeus is the father of all sorts of gods and goddesses. We'll meet some of his other wives later on. But with the Muse Mnemosyne, he breeds 9 daughters known as the Muses. Mnemosyne in ancient Greek means memory. If you'll think about it for a second, you can't have art without memory. Let's say I make up this wonderful and enchanting dance, which is very unlikely, but let's say I did, and it enchanted you all to death. I'd want to remember how to do it again, right? Or this little piano piece I'm working on that I call Pictures at an Exhibition. If I don't develop a memory, I won't learn how to play it twice. That's why I use lecture notes, because I want to make sure that the same performance art I did last year is still valid this year. There are 9 muses. I won't name them all, but included among them is Clio, the muse of history, patroness of historians. Okay, another muse that I'm fond of is Terpsichore, the muse of dancing. And the reason why Zeus has to be their father, according to Hesiod, is because if you think about the arts of dancing and poetry and acting and whatnot, you want Zeus to be responsible for them. You don't want to say, oh yeah, those are Cronus's kids, or those are Poseidon's kids. Poseidon's kids turned out to be dolphins and sea monsters and stuff. Okay? These are cultural goddesses who confer benefits to humankind, therefore they are daughters of Zeus. Pause for a question at this point. Jeremy.
What does Poseidon do to Aphrodite?
Poseidon doesn't do anything to Aphrodite. Who can? There are only 3 goddesses. Out of all the gods and goddesses, there are 3 goddesses that Aphrodite cannot affect. Athena, Artemis, and Hestia. All of the other humans in the world, all of the other gods and goddesses in the world are like putty in Aphrodite's hands. They don't do much of anything to Aphrodite because they are afraid of what Aphrodite can do to them. Okay? Other questions? I don't have time to tell you this one. It's the world's worst come-on line. It's delivered by Zeus in Book 14 of the Iliad. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me. So I'll tell you another story from Ovid's Metamorphoses. The story of a young woman who found out she was a cow. It's told to us by Ovid, Mark, for the purpose of I could tell this story very entertainingly. Well, and I don't worry, I will. However, the story does have a serious side to it, and see if you can figure it out. One day, it always started with one day, Jupiter. Remember, this story is being told to us in Latin by Ovid. Jupiter, father of gods and men. Jupiter, supreme ruler of the universe. Jupiter, god of order as opposed to chaos, etc. Jupiter, loving husband of Juno, is wandering by a river, the river Inachus, and he sees this beautiful young woman named Io. And he is taken by Io. He's captivated by her. But before he can accomplish his seedy way with the young woman, who should show up but Juno, his wife, otherwise known to the Greeks as Hera. Thinking quickly, Jupiter, the all-powerful guardian of justice in the universe, changes the young woman Io into a cow, thinking that he will trick Hera that way, Juno that way. This is not a very good cow. It's kind of a truncated, two-dimensional sort of cow. And of course, Juno, otherwise known as Hera, isn't buying any of it. Yeah, right. She comes up to Jupiter and says, Jupiter, is that a local cow, or did you just create that cow? Local, honey. It's a local cow. He doesn't fool her a bit. Juno's next question is, could I have the nice cow? Now Jupiter, supreme god, guarantor of justice in the universe, force of order, is caught in a dilemma. Either he says, heck no, Juno, that's actually an innocent young river nymph that I have turned into a cow. You cannot have her. Or saying, yeah, go ahead, take her away. Well, Jupiter says, go ahead, Hera. Go ahead, Juno. have the nice cow. Poor cow. At first, Juno decides, what would be the worst way to torment this poor woman? I know, I'll assign her a gadfly to just chase her around. And so this fly flies around at her butt and just chases her around to various places. Of course, she's none too clear as to what's going on. She's lost, she's being chased, and she doesn't know she's a cow yet. She doesn't know she's a cow until she, by chance, reaches her ancestral river. Her dad, the river god, has a local river. And she sees her dad wandering up and down the banks of the river of which he is the god, looking for his daughter, Io. And she wants to say to him, Dad, it's me, your daughter, Io. But Mitch, how does it come out? Moo. Is that the best you can do? She wants to say, it's me, Io. And it comes out. So she's actually a sad cow. Okay? And she wants to let her dad know it's her. So she gets this brilliant idea. She takes one hoof and scratches her name in ancient Greek, it's real short, into the sand with her hoof. And her dad looks at it. How would a really good and loving dad behave? Your name is? JR. Say you're a dad. Zeus has changed your daughter into a cow. She just scratched her name into the sand with her hoof. What do you say?
I don't know. I wouldn't be very happy.
Well, who would you be mad at?
Zeus?
Good, that's what I wanted you to say. Zeus. Is there anybody here who would not be mad at Zeus? But what's the point of being mad at Zeus? This is the speech that Io's dad delivers at this point. Great Io, you've gotten yourself changed into a cow. Our only daughter gets herself changed into a cow. Oh, that's great. Instead of picking you out a nice husband out of the kings and princes of the land, we're going to have to go to a pasture and pick you a bull. Instead of grandsons, I'm going to have grandcalves. Gee, thanks, Io. I wish I weren't a god, because then I could die of shame. Now, see, I told that amusingly, and you're laughing like a bunch of ninnies. They really are laughing. But the fact is, I mean, here this woman has been just massively messed up over by a god, and her dad is blaming her. Her rights as a human being, she's done nothing wrong, except for be attractive, and Zeus messed her over, and her dad's yelling at her. The story gets sadder. Hera finally, or Juno, finally decides, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put her on an island where she is going to be guarded by my personal servant Argus. So she's stuck being a cow, and as a cow, she's being guarded by Hera's 100-eyed servant Argus. No matter how many eyes Argus is resting at any time, he always has two of them open. And after years and years and years, Jupiter finally has a heart. He finally decides to send his son Mercury, otherwise known as Hermes, on a rescue mission. Hermes goes over to Argus with his lyre, and starts basically giving him a classical mythology lecture. He starts talking about the myth of this and that, then the myth of so-and-so and so on and so forth, and pretty soon Argus has got 40 eyes asleep. Pretty soon he's got 80 eyes asleep. And by the time he gets to the final lecture of LLT 121, Classical Mythology, Argus is fast asleep. And so Hermes/Mercury kills him, springing Io. What a great god that Zeus is. That's where we're going to park it for the time being.